leave us no alternative to the maintenance of real and respectable strength.
Hey, Composing Gloves here, and this is a video on bone conduction in the critical listening series. What is bone conduction? Well, you hear normally through your ears. Sound reaches your ears, moves your eardrum or your tympanic membrane, goes through the three ossicles, hits the oval window, goes through your cochlea, basilar membrane, tectoral membrane, you know, that whole mumbo jumbo thing. Goes up to your brain. Really cool stuff for another video. And so what is bone conduction? Well, it's the same thing. It's gaining popularity a lot recently, which is why I also think it's becoming a more and more relative topic. And I'm frankly shocked at how little people know about it and how little people talk about it. But anyways, what it is so the way your cochlea can respond to vibrations. Okay, that's the main idea. Your cochlea can respond to vibrations. And what's another interesting thing is your three ossicles are not 100% dependent necessarily on the tympanic membrane, but that's a really complicated sort of topic that I don't want to get into because I don't totally get it. It blew my mind though. But anyways, your bones can vibrate bypassing your tympanic membrane. Your three ossicles, if you want to know what that little bit was about, basically act as a form of compression, specifically helping bone conduction, because other mammals that are less reliant on this apparently only have one bone for their inner ear or their middle ear, not their inner ear. And so I don't know. It was a weird thing. I was reading about it. If any of you want to drop more info about it, that's cool. But it's just a cool thing. Another thing that you're just like, dang, your body's freaking insane. But anyways, your bone vibrates, causing your inner ear to receive vibrations, and your cochlea therefore moves, causing your hair cells to perceive vibration and go on. So we have two ways actually of perceiving sound. This is why your voice, when you talk, like if you were to talk a little bit right now and pay attention to that, and then you were to listen to that same recording over speakers, you're going to say, wow, that sounds really different. Exactly, because you are receiving it via bone conduction. I have something I really quick want to show you sort of the impact of bone conduction. And then we'll get into a little bit of acoustics. Actually, it is acoustics. It's kind of an interesting deal. And so, okay, what's the exercise? So I want you to take your ears, first talk out loud, you know, hum a little bit, go hum, 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 hum. And so hum, and then you talk a little bit, you know, get really comfortable, pay extra close attention to your voice. Now, I want you to plug your ears and do the same thing, hum. So go hum, talk a little bit, you know, and really pay attention to how your voice sounds now. Okay. That demonstrates the power of bone conduction right there. So what happens when you plug your ears though? Like, why is it so dramatic a difference when you plug your ears? And you may have noticed this, and this has really interesting implications with earbuds specifically. Over the ear, there's a reason they tend to sound better is because they're more acoustically focused than earbuds, which also do enact a form of bone vibration. So man, people didn't know that. I don't know why people don't know about this stuff. But anyways, what happens is when you close your ears, you're cutting off that. It's a quarter tone resonator. Remember that? So first off, you're closing that. But the more important thing is that a hole in your head, especially two holes, will act as a source of release. Emissions, a lot of your bone conduction energy will be released there. It cannot travel across the hole. It has to go around. So naturally it will decrease. But if you plug your ears, you have formed a bridge it can go across, and it becomes a much more powerful way of receiving bone conduction vibrations. The other thing is you've effectively put a filter on your ears, blocking out high frequencies by putting your fingers in the way. So that's another reason why. So there's a double-fold thing acoustically going on here. So let's talk about some interesting acoustic things real fast. So acoustically speaking, if you know about a string when it vibrates, you know, I'm not going to get into acoustics right now or sound and physics and stuff like that, because honestly, I could go way more in depth than I did in sound and synth basics, but I think that would be a little overwhelming for people at the beginning. But if you were to look at a string, ignoring how it's bent and just saying to a fixed string, you know, basic, simple thing, and it oscillates, you know, goes up and down, la, 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 creates a vibration. And then if you cut it in half, you can, you know, use ratios to determine different notes and all these really cool things, right? So so you have that sort of in your head. Now, that's, you know, just up and down, back and forth. If we were to move over to a drum head it starts getting a lot more complicated because a drum head does this. And the middle of the drum goes up and down more than the edges of the drum, depending on how they're tightened. It forms a much way more complex series of harmonics than it's like crazy complex. So we're not even going to talk about that, but I want you to be aware of like how complicated that is. And then think of your skull. Your skull is friggin' insane. Like it's got brains, it's got bones. All these bones are attached different ways. It's a moving thing off of like whatever you want it to do, all these things. So my question was about these bone conduction headphone things. What is the frequency response? And what is the, how does your head change this? In layman's terms, like how does your head change this? Because it's an interesting thing. So I looked it up. There's actually a lot of papers published about how your head and resonant frequencies and stuff in your head, which is really kind of cool. Your head is definitely a filter of some kind, which is why your voice sounds so different. But basically, bass frequencies kind of stink just because, they're bass frequencies. They're big wavelengths and your head's not that big. So they're not going to be that great at transmitting bass. And higher frequencies are actually pretty okay because your head can handle that. Now, you need to be aware that when your skull vibrates, we would refer to that as a form of distortion. Your skull is going from where it normally sits and moving. It's literally distorting itself, causing the vibration to allow it to move through your skull. So when they say distortion, it's not like something crazy or big or like, oh my gosh, it's just what happens is your skull gets messed up. Some common questions before I get into how this matters to you as an engineer are, does this help deaf people? Absolutely. It only helps them though if their membrane and their outer and inner hair cells, well, mostly their inner hair cells are intact. If they are not intact, then they can't hear jack anyways. However, there are some really interesting implications with higher frequencies, ultra high frequency studies. You can go look up ultra high frequency studies if you want, but that's totally not relevant to critical listening, so I'm not going to really talk about it, but they use it for a number of things. But if your problem is your tympanic membrane, then this can help you. The other question is, can this damage your hearing if you use those types of headphones? Absolutely, freaking yeah. Why wouldn't it? So now let's talk about another thing. This introduces a type of distortion to your basilar membrane that's really interesting. So you know how things get loud and you could plug your ears to make it softer. What have you done? Because you still perceive sound. Well, you've just simply cut off acoustic vibrations from getting into your ear, but you still feel vibrations, and that's what you're perceiving principally as sound. Oh, another question is, if I'm wearing headphones like that, do I still hear outer? Yeah, absolutely. You will hear extraneous noises, as it's kind of weird. It's like you have a conversation going in your head. I've never worn them, but I'm just going off of my knowledge of how this will kind of work altogether. So, which I know it's kind of weird that I'm describing all this without it, but I've read so much about this. This is such an interesting topic. I really want to buy a pair. I just cannot bring it out of me to forfeit money for a pair that I know I'm just not going to use that much. And it's used to treat tinnitus. A lot of tinnitus treatments involve bone conduction headphones. Very, very useful. But anyways, so the whole plug in your ear, this is really important for you as an engineer. When you turn the volume up, we notice that first, let's draw the distinction before I get into that between your ears frequency response when it comes to acoustic vibrations. And then I need you to realize that your bones are going to emphasize and add resonances that are light years different than your acoustic perception. And so you have a whole nother frequency response. So Fletcher-Munson curves were tested acoustically, right? And we just talked about earbuds and how sticking those in your ears, not only are you putting all that pressure in your ear, but you're also putting it in your bone. So that also affects things. And actually, in that case, it can be kind of used to reinforce bass if you have really complicated headphone designs, but you could do it. And so now let's talk about loudness, okay? So, of course, we just talked about the bone conduction thing, how you plug your ears and la, la, la. Now imagine it's really, really, really loud. Like freaking 150 decibels. You're sitting next to a jet engine taking off. Something that's going to damage your hearing quite badly. You plug your ears and it don't matter, man. Why? Because it's going through bone conduction. That's why. And bone conduction, so you got to think about this too. I've been wondering about this. I don't know how far this goes, but my question was, okay, it can move your basilar membrane, but what would stop vibrations from reaching straight into your hair cells? What would stop them from vibrating the very roots of the hair cells or whatever? Like, I've been wondering that. I didn't really find anything on it because it's a pretty specific question, but I discovered a lot of interesting stuff along the way. So you got to be aware of that. When you turn your volume up, you might be also tricking yourself, not just by the sheer volume, but also you are introducing some resonances. When you're sitting on things, you work the exact same way as a speaker. It'd be interesting to do bone conduction through like your feet and see what you can hear through your feet. There are famous percussionists that use this. Like, you perceive sound through a lot more than just your ears, which is a really interesting thing to sort of think about. Now, how is this? What's another application, Mr. Gloves, with me as an audio engineer? Why would this matter to me more? Like that sounds kind of interesting, but I really don't see how this is going to be very useful. Like, I hear you out, I know you, but, well, I don't know you, but I get you. I want you to really quick consider, I think there will be a lot of innovations, especially first off with just the popularity of them. I think people will start to mix specifically for those. I think they could be used in immersive sound design where extraneous noise and just talking. I think there's going to be a load of applications basically that are going to technologically demand that we mix for that and that we be aware of how these frequency responses mix. And so closing your ears and talking will be a healthy thing, I think, to listen and understand how you perceive sound when you make it. It'll just make you more aware, more keen to the way things actually sound. And also to the fact that no matter what you do, everyone is going to hear things a little bit differently just because they're different sizes, different shapes, different stuff. Some people are fat, some people are not. People with fat, I bet, will have a harder time perceiving higher frequency content than people who are not fat. Like, that's just a guess, but I mean, it makes sense. That's people with a lot more skin. That's one of the things about the over the ear conduction is that your skin technically acts as a buffer against high frequency content. However, it doesn't really matter too much because it's like super short. So 20 kilohertz, and most people can't even really hear that anyway. There were studies done with, does your frequency response hearing change? Now, you might run across a high frequency content article that I ran across that was talking about nodal things. Actually talks about the implications that it could have on your eyesight and a number of other things. But anyways, pretty much no. In fact, it's a little bit worse just because your head is made to keep things rather stable. Your eyes aren't like, bulbing around everywhere. Like, you don't have organs flying around. It's pretty cushioned. And so high frequency content, the really, really high stuff, will naturally just lose itself just a little bit. And there are ways of getting around it, like hearing aids. People, because it originally was mostly a medical technology, pretty much still is, but hearing aids, they would put it directly on your bone. Like, they would do an implant to avoid any of that padding, making it the best they possibly could. So that's bone conduction. That's a little bit about it. That's what I know. I pointed out some interesting acoustic things. Now, most of the time you can put it on the back of your neck, which to me was a really interesting place to put it, but apparently it works pretty good. Or not the neck, but the back of the head. I wasn't totally sure where you put it. And the other one was in front of your ears. And so just really interesting. I know SWAT, I met with some SWAT police officers. I'm not sure if they're termed, anyway, SWAT people, and they use them in combat. I know that the Army uses them in combat. And let's see here. Yeah, it's just a really interesting thing. I think it will definitely be used more, especially for recreation. So I know, be aware of that. Be aware of why things may sound different. You might be able to catch yourself feeling things or hearing things you didn't know you were hearing before, just because of knowledge about this. If you have any more information about it, or if I got something wrong, or maybe something's been discovered since now that I had a question about, drop it in the comments. It'd be very interesting. Subscribe and have a blessed day.